A day in the French Revolution. The sun had not fully risen yet, but Paris was already awake. It was the 14th of July, 1789, and the air carried a strange tension, half fear, half hope. The sky above the city looked pale and gray, as if it knew something important was about to happen.
In the narrow streets near Rue Saint-Antoine, a young man named Louis Mercier, 23 years old, walked quickly with a loaf of hard bread under his arm. He was tall, thin, and had the tired face of someone who had worked more than he had slept. Paris had been restless for weeks. Food was expensive, bread was scarce, and the anger of the people grew louder every day. Louis passed a group of women standing in line in front of a bakery. Their voices were sharp. 3 hours we wait for bread. And for what? Nothing. They give us crumbs. The rich eat while we starve. Louis lowered his head and kept walking. He knew these scenes too well. The streets of Paris. Paris in 1789 was loud, dirty, and alive. The streets were filled with smells: fresh bread, horse manure, smoke from wooden fires, the metallic scent of the river. Markets were crowded. Children ran between carts. Merchants shouted prices. Beggars asked for coins. But beneath all this noise, something deeper moved through the city. Revolution. Rumors had spread. The king dismissed his popular finance minister. Soldiers from foreign armies were entering the city. The people had no weapons. The Bastille held gunpowder. It felt like the city was a giant pot starting to boil. Louis stopped at the edge of Place de Grève, where a crowd of angry men were gathered. One man climbed onto a barrel and shouted, "The king does not hear us! We must take our rights ourselves!" The crowd roared in agreement. Louis watched silently. He understood their anger, but he feared what might happen next. Louis's family home. He continued toward a small stone building near the river. Inside lived his mother, Madame Mercier, a gentlewoman with tired eyes, and his younger sister, Elise, a bright 16-year-old girl who still believed Paris could become something better. When Louis entered, Elise looked up from the table. "Another long line for bread?" Louis nodded. "People are shouting everywhere. Something is coming today. I feel it." His mother sighed, placing her hands on the wooden table. "We have seen unrest before. Maybe it will calm down." But Louis shook his head. "No, Maman, this is different." Just then, a distant sound echoed through the streets. A sharp, metallic clang, then another, then hundreds. "The bells," Elise whispered. "The bells of Saint-Gervais." Louis stepped to the window. Crowds were running, voices rising. Something was happening. The call to action. Louis left the house and followed the growing crowd toward the Hôtel de Ville. People pushed forward: workers, shopkeepers, students, old men with canes, young boys with wooden sticks. Even women joined, their faces filled with determination. One man shouted, "To the Bastille! They have the gunpowder!" Another replied, "Arms first! We need weapons!" The crowd grew louder. Flags waved. Voices united. Louis felt his heartbeat quicken. He had never been part of something so large, so powerful. At the square, city officials tried to speak, but their voices drowned under the chants, "Aux armes! Aux armes! To arms! To arms!" And then something changed. A group of men broke into Les Invalides, the military hospital. They rushed inside and came out carrying muskets, swords, bayonets, anything they could find. The revolution had arms now. Louis swallowed hard. He wasn't sure whether to join or run home. But when he looked around, saw hungry children, tired mothers, angry men, he felt something shift inside him. This is not only about bread, he thought. This is about dignity. He took a musket that was being passed around. And for the first time in his life, Louis Mercier felt like part of history. The road to the Bastille. The march began. thousands of people poured through the narrow Parisian streets, pushing toward the stone fortress that had stood over the city for centuries, the Bastille, a symbol of royal fear and oppression, a place where people disappeared without trial, a prison the people had come to hate. As Louis walked with the crowd, he saw Paris in a way he had never seen before. Women shouting from balconies, children running alongside the march, blacksmiths handing out metal bars as weapons, priests watching silently from church doors, merchants closing their shops in fear, soldiers standing uncertainly at corners. The city was alive, vibrating like a drum. Louis felt both terrified and strangely inspired. The Bastille appears. By noon, the crowd reached the fortress. The Bastille stood high and dark, its stone walls thick and cold, its towers rising like giants above the people. Louis had seen it before, but today it looked different. More threatening, more symbolic, more final. The crowd shouted, "Open the gates! We want the gunpowder! Give us the prisoners!" Smoke filled the air as men hit the gates with axes and hammers. Shots fired. Soldiers from the towers responded. Louis ducked behind a wooden cart as musket fire cracked above his head. His hands trembled. This wasn't just shouting anymore. This was war. Next to him, a young man whispered, "We can't stop now. If we stop, nothing will ever change." Louis nodded, breath shaking. The first breach. After hours of fighting, someone shouted, "They're lowering the bridge!" The drawbridge of the Bastille slowly came down. The crowd roared with such force that Louis felt the ground vibrate. People surged forward. Gunsmoke everywhere, screams, shouts, the heat of bodies pressing, fear and courage mixing into one wild force. Louis felt a burning sensation in his arm. A bullet grazed him. He looked at the small line of blood. "I'm alive," he whispered, both relieved and terrified. Inside the fortress walls, soldiers retreated, overwhelmed by the sheer number of people. The Bastille was falling. The symbol of change. By late afternoon, the fortress surrendered. Louis walked inside with thousands of Parisians. The air smelled of smoke and gunpowder. The stones were dark, stained, old. He saw prisoners, only a few, and not dangerous men, but poor souls forgotten by the world. One old prisoner whispered, "Are we free?" Louis helped him stand. "Yes," he said. "Today, Paris is free." Outside, crowds cheered, waving flags, drums beating loudly. Some men climbed the walls, shouting victory. Others began tearing down the gates. Louis stood among the people, breathing heavily, covered in dust and sweat. He had never felt so tired. He had never felt so alive. Elise's words echoed in his mind. Maybe Paris can become something better. For the first time, Louis believed it too. A city on the edge. The evening sun over Paris was weak and red, almost like a dying flame. Smoke rose slowly from the direction of the Bastille, drifting across the rooftops like a heavy memory. The air smelled of gunpowder, sweat, and the heat of thousands of bodies that had marched together. Paris was not the same city it had been that morning. Louis walked through the crowded streets with slow, tired steps. His arm still hurt from the graze of the bullet, but the pain felt distant compared to the weight of everything he had witnessed. Around him, people were shouting, celebrating, arguing. Some hugged each other, some cried. Some carried pieces of stone from the Bastille as trophies. Others walked with dazed eyes, unable to fully understand what they had done. He passed a woman whispering, "The fortress fell! The fortress fell!" As if saying it out loud made it feel real. Louis pushed through the crowd until he reached the river. The water moved dark and calm under the fading light. He sat on the stone edge, breathing in the cool air, trying to steady his thoughts. For a moment, he wondered what his mother and sister were thinking. Were they scared, worried, proud? He wasn't sure. He wasn't even sure what he felt. Footsteps approached behind him. When he turned, he saw a man he recognized from the Bastille March, a blacksmith named Renaud, tall and broad-shouldered with soot still on his hands. "You fought well today," Renaud said, sitting beside him. "I don't know if that's true," Louis answered quietly. "There were moments I felt frozen, moments I wanted to run." "That's normal," Renaud replied. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite fear." Louis let that thought settle in his mind. Above them, the bells of Notre Dame began to ring. Not for prayer, not for mourning, for revolution. Renaud stood. "Come on, we need to check on the others. Paris changes tonight." Louis followed him back into the heart of the city. The aftermath in the streets. As night fell, Paris glowed with torchlight. Crowds blocked intersections. Makeshift barricades rose from overturned carts, barrels, and wooden planks. People carried muskets, knives, even farming tools. Every corner felt like it buzzed with energy, part victory, part chaos. Louis felt the tension. Some men shouted for freedom and justice. Others shouted for revenge. A fight broke out between two groups debating what should happen next. Louis stepped back, uneasy. "This is dangerous," he thought. "If we don't unite, we will destroy ourselves." They turned onto Rue des Archives, where Renaud led Louis into a small tavern hidden behind thick wooden shutters. Inside, a group of men and women sat around a large table, papers and candles scattered in front of them. "These are the organizers," Renaud said quietly. "People think the revolution begins in the streets. But it also begins here, in planning." An older man with sharp eyes looked at Louis. "You were at the Bastille. What did you see?" Louis took a breath. People were angry, desperate, but also hopeful. They weren't fighting for destruction. They were fighting to be heard. The room fell quiet for a moment. Then the older man nodded approvingly. "That hope is what we need to protect. If we lose it, this city will drown in blood." Sophia, a young woman with ink-stained fingers, spoke next. "We must reach the districts outside the center, spread information, warn people, prepare for the king's response." Louis asked, "Do you think the king will send soldiers?" Renaud answered instead. "He already has. There are reports of troops near Versailles. The court is panicking." Louis felt cold inside. "Will they attack Paris?" "They might," Sophia said. "The Bastille was a symbol. Its fall is a message, but the king may not accept that message." Louis understood now. The real danger hadn't passed. It was only beginning. At home. Fear and hope. Louis returned home near midnight. Elise ran to him the moment he walked in. "You're hurt," she cried, seeing the blood on his sleeve. "It's nothing," Louis assured her. "Just a scratch." His mother's hand shook as she touched his face. "I prayed you would come back safely." Louis sat at the table and explained what had happened, trying to choose his words carefully. Elise listened with wide eyes, imagining everything: the crowd, the fortress, the smoke. Their mother listened with a heavy heart. "People are celebrating," Elise said. "Isn't that good?" Louis hesitated. "It's good, but dangerous. When people feel power for the first time, they can lose control." His mother poured warm soup into their bowls. "Promise me you won't go again." Louis lowered his head. "I can't promise that, maman. Paris needs everyone right now." The words hurt her, but she nodded slowly. She understood, even if she didn't want to. The king's reaction. The next morning, the city was filled with rumors. Louis walked through the streets listening. "They say the king is furious. No, they say he's frightened. I heard he dismissed all his ministers. I heard he's sending the army. I heard he's fleeing Paris." No one knew the truth. Near the city hall, a courier rode through the crowd with a paper in his hand. He shouted, "News from Versailles!" People rushed toward him. Louis pushed through the mass of bodies to hear the announcement. "The king has restored Necker to his ministry!" A wave of cheers filled the square. Necker, a minister loved by the people, had been dismissed earlier, one of the reasons the revolt had begun. But seconds later, the cheering quieted. Someone asked, "Does this mean he accepts the revolution?" The courier hesitated. "No one knows." Louis felt the truth settle deep inside. The king was reacting, but he wasn't surrendering. Not yet. Growing restlessness. Over the next days, Paris became stranger. More barricades, more meetings in taverns, more people with weapons, more hunger, more anger. Groups formed militias, neighborhood watches, political clubs. Everyone talked about freedom, equality, rights, bread, justice, but no one agreed on how to achieve them. Louis tried to balance everything. He helped the organizers. He protected his family. He tried to calm frightened neighbors. It was as if the city stood on a thin line. One wrong step and everything could collapse. One evening, Elise asked him, "Do you think everything will get better now?" Louis looked at her gentle face, her hopeful eyes. "I think things will change," he said honestly. "But change is never easy." The shadow of the soldiers. A week after the fall of the Bastille, new rumors spread. "Soldiers! Near the gates! Foreign regiments! Huge numbers!" Louis ran with Renaud to the northern barrier of the city. There, people gathered under the walls, staring into the distance. Clouds of dust rose on the horizon. It looked like an approaching storm. "Troops," Renaud whispered. "So many." Louis felt his stomach tighten. He imagined muskets firing, cannons roaring, streets filled with screams. "We must prepare," Louis said. Renaud nodded. "Paris will not surrender." The people around them shouted, "We will defend our city! Liberty or death! No more kings!" Louis heard their voices echo into the open fields, and he realized something. The revolution was no longer a moment. It was becoming a fire that could warm the nation or burn it to ash. The fire that changed Paris. Morning light touched the city softly, but Paris was no longer soft. It was sharper, louder, more awake than ever before. The fall of the Bastille had opened a door that could never be closed again. And everyone, rich, poor, noble, worker, priest, soldier, felt the change in their bones. Louis walked along Rue Saint-Antoine with a sense of purpose, but also with a knot of tension in his stomach. The city breathed differently now. There was a feeling of excitement, but also fear. The air itself felt heavier, like Paris was waiting for something enormous to happen. Men with muskets stood at every corner, not royal soldiers, ordinary citizens. They called themselves the National Guard. Their clothes were mismatched, their weapons old, but their eyes were sharp with determination. Children watched from doorways. Women whispered from balconies. Nobles hid behind locked shutters. Paris had become a city of eyes watching everything. Louis stopped at a small square where a wooden platform had been built. A man stood on it, speaking to a crowd with a loud, passionate voice. "The king must come to Paris," he shouted. "He must see the people. He must answer to the people." The crowd cheered. Louis listened carefully. Weeks ago, he would have never imagined hearing such words spoken openly. Now it felt normal. But normal didn't mean safe. The tension rises. Later that day, Louis met Renaud near the Hôtel de Ville. They stood beside a group of citizens organizing patrols. "We need to watch the northern gates," Renaud said. "More soldiers are moving near the city." Louis frowned. "Are they coming to attack?" "No one knows. But the king is nervous." and nervous rulers make dangerous choices. Louis nodded. He felt the same fear himself. Every new rumor felt heavier than the last. As they walked through the narrow streets, they saw signs of growing unrest. People arguing about food, merchants complaining about prices, posters calling for reform, posters calling for revenge. It was as if Paris had split into many smaller cities, each with its own ideas of right and wrong. Louis wondered where all this would lead. At home, the city's shadow. When Louis returned home that evening, Elise greeted him with a worried expression. "There were people shouting outside," she said. "They argued about the king. Some said he must be punished. Others said he must be protected." Their mother sat near the small window, hands folded tightly. "I fear for what tomorrow brings." Louis placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens, we will protect our home. We have to stay together." Elise looked at her brother. "Do you still believe things will change for the better?" Louis hesitated, then answered softly. "Yes, but change always brings storms first." She nodded slowly, trying to understand. That night, Louis couldn't sleep. He lay awake, listening to the distant sounds of people chanting, shouting, marching. The city felt alive, almost breathing, and he wondered if he was hearing the beginning of a new world or the breaking of the old one. The king enters Paris. The next morning, bells rang across the city. News spread like fire. "The king is coming to Paris!" Thousands flooded the streets. Louis joined the crowd heading toward the eastern gates. Dust rose into the air as people pushed forward, trying to get a glimpse. Hours passed before the royal carriage appeared. Louis expected a powerful, confident king, but what he saw was a tired man with pale skin and fearful eyes. King Louis XVI wore a simple coat, not a grand royal outfit. His face looked empty, almost defeated. When he stepped out of the carriage, no trumpets played, no fanfare, no shouts of "Long live the king!" Instead, the people watched silently. The king looked at the crowd. The crowd looked back. For a moment, the city held its breath. Then the mayor placed a blue and red cockade on the king's hat, the symbol of Paris, of revolution. Louis saw the king's hand tremble slightly. "It is done," Renaud whispered. "The king bows to the people." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Louis felt something different. He felt the weight of the moment. A king wearing the symbol of revolution. A king who understood he was no longer the master of France, but a man standing before a nation rising to claim its voice. New hope, new fear. The days after the king's arrival were filled with celebration and anxiety. People believed a new France was being born, but no one knew how to shape it. Meetings filled the nights. Arguments filled the days. Some wanted freedom, some wanted revenge, some didn't know what they wanted at all. Louis found himself torn. He wanted justice for the people, but he didn't want blood in the streets. One night, Elise sat beside him on the steps of their home. The moonlight touched the river softly. "Do you think the violence is over?" she asked. Louis shook his head. "I think it has only rested." She sighed. "I wish Paris could be peaceful." Louis smiled sadly. "Paris is a city of passion. It never sleeps." The crowd turns. A week later, Louis and Renaud stood near a large gathering at Place de la Nation. A group of revolutionaries spoke passionately about the abuses of the nobles and the failures of the king. But the tone was different now, sharper, harder. One man shouted, "We must punish every traitor." Another yelled, "If the king does not listen, we will force him." Louis felt uneasy. "This is turning dangerous," he whispered. Renaud nodded. Revolutions are like storms. They cleanse, but they also destroy. Suddenly, A nobleman trying to cross the square was spotted by the crowd. People surrounded him, shouting accusations. Louis pushed forward. "Stop!" he shouted. "He has not harmed anyone!" But the crowd didn't listen. Fear and anger had become stronger than reason. Renaud helped Louis pull the nobleman out of the mob. They guided him to safety as stones hit the walls nearby. Breathing heavily, Louis realized something. The revolution belonged to the people. But the people had many faces, and not all were guided by justice. A choice about the future. That evening, in a quiet moment by the river, Renaud asked Louis a simple but heavy question. "What will you do now? The city needs people who can think clearly, people who can speak for others. You are one of them." Louis looked at the water, its surface reflecting the orange glow of lanterns. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," he said. Renaud placed a hand on his shoulder. "Strength is not loud. It is steady." Louis thought of his mother. He thought of Elise. He thought of the old prisoner he helped from the Bastille. He thought of the frightened king. And he realized something important. A revolution was not only about tearing down walls. It was about building something better in their place. "I will help," Louis said quietly. "I want to be part of building the new France." Renaud smiled. "Paris needs that." The new morning. The next day, Louis walked through the streets with different eyes. He still saw hunger. He still saw fear. He still saw anger. But he also saw hope. Children running freely, men discussing new rights, women speaking boldly in public squares, people helping each other at markets, a city trying to learn its new heartbeat. Louis felt the weight of responsibility settle into his chest. Not as a burden, but as a purpose. He returned home, kissed his mother on the cheek, and told Elise, "Things will not become perfect overnight, but we will make something better, slowly, together." Elise smiled brightly. "Then I'm not afraid anymore?" Louis walked back into the awakening city, the sun rising behind him, illuminating the streets of Paris. In that light he understood. The revolution was not a moment. It was a beginning. A long, difficult, beautiful beginning. And he would be part of it.